All right, so I'm just trying to go over how I kind of switched from being a right-wing nationalist, pro-religion in 2020 to anti-religion, left-wing communist in 2021 toward in 2020. That's when I made the transition. So it's kind of like so much stuff, but I'll just kind of go over some of the things my grandpa was teaching me in 2019 that was kind of confusing me. So one thing was, like I said, my uncle loved Donald Trump and he loved QAnon. That's my grandpa's son, and but my uncle told me that my grandpa was sold out because my grandpa liked CNN, and my grandpa was like watching CNN, and my grandpa didn't really like Donald Trump, and I think the reason is because my grandpa, he cares about attitude and tone and all that type of stuff. And my grandpa's like, well, he expresses dualistic software. The way that he expresses himself, ally, enemy, dualistic, impersonal software. And, Donald Trump got a lot of people mad. And my grandpa didn't like that, My grandpa was like, he expresses dualistic software. But at the time, remember, I didn't really understand necessarily what my grandpa meant. And I was starting to get more of an idea later. But my uncle was like, yeah, grandpa, he sold out to the cabal. He's on the side of the cabal. So my uncle thought that the Jews kind of ran things and the Jews wanted to race mix the white people. And he thought that Donald Trump was a genius and he was fighting against the cabal, the Jewish elites who are trying to race mix the white people and create, like George Soros and stuff. And my uncle really liked Donald Trump. But my uncle was like, I think he's a genius. You don't think he's a genius? And he was talking to my grandpa. This was in like 2018 or something. I forget. But my grandpa was like, he said he didn't think he was a genius. He said that he thought that, it's just, he expressed dualistic software. So that was kind of confusing me a little bit. So, and I kind of wanted to get on my grandpa's good side. So I'm like, well, is my grandpa a leftist or a right winger? I can't really tell. But it seemed to me clear that he's a right winger because he seemed to be against giving handouts or giving welfare and stuff. But at the same time, my grandpa would say, well, but there's no formula. Sometimes, if you're in the flow, you can discern when giving is appropriate. For instance, my grandpa saw this white guy give or get some money from this other woman. And my grandpa was like, he told me that he could tell that there was an energy exchange there. And my grandpa thought that one occurred in the flow. Because my grandpa would say, if the person's entitled, then giving to him won't help. Or if the person, it could enable the person to not get a job and stuff like that, right? But my grandpa would be like, but sometimes it could be in the flow to give. So my grandpa would be like, there's no formula. You have to be discerning. So I'm getting a little confused. I'm like, okay. So my grandpa seems like a right winger, but sometimes he seems a little left wing. And then like another thing was I asked my grandpa at one point, like what he thought about IQs. And my grandpa was like, well, to me, it doesn't really matter what your IQ is. All that matters is how hard you work. Do you go all out? How hard do you work? Do you put everything into it? Are you in the flow? And I liked that when I was a left-wing communist. I remember I always hated the idea of IQ because I thought it was pro-white and anti-people of color. And I was anti-white and I saw myself as Jewish and I wanted white people to mix. So, but when my grandpa told me this, I was like, so are you a left winger or a right winger? Because I always thought that the people who were right wing, like pro-white, more conservative, they liked the idea of IQ. And they used that to justify inequality. They'd be like, like Dennis Prager and those guys. They'd be like, yeah, or Jordan Peterson. They'd be like, yeah, the reason why people, some people have more money is because they're smarter. They have higher IQs. It's natural. The lobsters, there's hierarchies within the lobster kingdom, according to Jordan Peterson. And it's because women tend to be more agreeable and even female lobsters are more agreeable, and it creates hierarchies where males dominate. And, in the human kingdom, there's male-female hierarchies, and there's also hierarchies based on intelligence. And it's natural in the animal kingdom. It's natural in the human kingdom. And I always thought that was more of a right-wing concept to say it's natural, these hierarchies, and even like so it's natural that white people make more money and stuff because white people have higher IQs. So I was like, okay, but my grandpa's like, no, I don't really, I I think all that matters is how hard you work. So again, I was kind of confused because I'm like, well, it still seems kind of right wing because he's still in that whole idea of like, yeah, we'll just work hard and, like justifying the status quo. If you work hard, you're going to do well. And, that always seemed to me like kind of a right wing type of thing. But, and again, my grandpa was like, he didn't want my mom and dad to give me any money because he's like, well, Warren Buffett didn't give his kids any money. But, because he wants people to just work hard. And, and my grandpa also taught this thing like that when people win the lottery, a lot of them people go broke. Because my grandpa would be like, if you just give people money, then they can misuse it. And that people have to, my grandpa would say they have to serve an apprenticeship to money before that they can really utilize money in a good way. So to me, that seemed like right wing again. Like my grandpa would be like, yeah, so don't give to the poor because they'll just misuse the money. Welfare won't help because they'll just misuse the money. So I was like, that's right wing. But at the same time, my grandpa was kind of against IQ because he's like, all that matters is how hard you work. And then there was also that time when I asked my grandpa, well, what do you think like about the gender hierarchies? Do you think it's just natural that women tend to go more into like helping professions and men into like mathematics or engineering and stuff, like more doing oriented professions? And like, little girls, they play with dolls and because they're more caring, and boys play with like knives and swords because they're more into action and competition and stuff. My grandpa was like, I don't think so. I think that it has more to do with, what the parents kind of push their children toward. And I think it's more cultural. And I was like, huh? Because a lot of the evidence doesn't seem to indicate that. But my grandpa was like, well, it doesn't matter. All that matters is, because I was a right winger and I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe it was natural, these hierarchies, right? And I became, when I was a left winger, like I said, I was against my grandpa when my grandpa one time said, I went to one of his sermons in Kauai, and my grandpa was like, women tend to be more relationship oriented. And I got really mad at him. And I was like, Grandpa, don't make generalizations. There's women who are relationship oriented and there's men who are relationship oriented, right? And then so I don't know if I made my grandpa more into the idea of like social constructions because I made fun, like I was mad at him before. But anyways, now my grandpa subscribed to the idea of social constructions. But the reason why I was into social constructions was I was like, yeah. And the same thing with black people. And black people, they're the only reason why there's differences is because of environment. Because I wanted black people and white people to mix. And I wanted to say it's a social construction. But my grandpa didn't know that about me. So, but then I'm like, so grandpa, do you think that, and I wanted to be the same thing with like men and women. Like it's a social construction. But really I wanted to destroy white people because I saw myself as Jewish and I saw white people as bad. And so I think it was my ego. So I was like, well, what do you think of social? So you think, Grandpa, that there's social constructions, that race is a social construction in gender? My grandpa was like, yeah, I think so. My grandpa was like, but it doesn't matter. All that matters is your software and how hard you work. And if you go all out and stuff. And again, to me, that seemed like it was right-wing white supremacist. But at the same time, seems like he's subscribing to the idea of social construction. And I'm like, well, that's a leftist idea. So I was confused a little bit. And then, like I said, I went to visit my grandpa in Washington, and my grandpa's like, if you're going to stay with me, you're going to need to get a job. And the reason why your mom and dad won't talk to you is because you're dependent on them, and they resent that. And you need to be, you need to not ask for handouts, and you need to be a part of the anti-entropic reordering function. Everything is energy, and it's anti-entropic reordering function. You need to be a part of synergy and creativity, and and you do that by getting a job and working and stuff. And I'm like, Grandpa, I discovered the theory of everything, and I would like to talk to my mom and dad. And he's like, no, well, you need to get a job. And so at this, I'm thinking like, well, my grandpa can't help it. He's a white supremacist. He's a right winger. But at the same time, my grandpa was confusing me because, again, he was like, he didn't like Donald Trump. But he thought that but also a lot of people didn't like Donald Trump. He was like, because he thought that he was expressing dualistic software. And my grandpa was like, he didn't like Tucker Carlson, because my grandpa was like, well, Tucker Carlson, my grandpa was like, you see how when Tucker Carlson talks, he furrows his brow? My grandpa was like, that's an expression of like dualistic software. And, and my grandpa thought that like Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson, and a lot of the right wingers and Fox people, their tone and their attitudes was self-confirmatory. And it was emotional and self-confirmatory. And my grandpa was like, and I like that girl from the CNN, I forget her name, Maddow or something, Rachel Maddow. And she's like, she seems to be more discerning and, less, emotion and stuff. But my grandpa would later change his idea on that. But my grandpa was watching, what's it called? That show, Stephen Colbert and stuff. And Stephen Colbert, the left-handed guy with all these black people around him. And so I'm like, is my grandpa a left-winger? Like, I'm confused. I'm like, he's always seems right-wing, but now he seems left-wing. And I was confused. So then I went back home after my grandpa kicked me out of this place because my grandpa, again, we got in an argument because I wanted to talk to my mom and dad, and my grandpa was like, he seemed to be on their side and basically justifying my mom and dad not talking to me. So I was upset, and I went back to my place. And I was like, my grandpa's just a right winger, white supremacist. I didn't like him, but at the same time, I'm confused. I'm like, but he doesn't like Donald Trump. And at the time, I liked Donald Trump because I was like, Donald Trump, he's fighting for the white people, like my uncle thought. And I became a right winger nationalist at that time. And I was like, there's an agenda against the white people. And I was like, white people have more swag flow and stuff like that. So I was like, I was on Donald Trump's side. So I was like, I was a little confused. But then at the same time, like I said, I wanted to get basketball videos of when I was younger. And I knew that being like pro-Trump and being white supremacist would be, contrary to that because a lot of my friends were black. But at the same time, I was like, but Donald Trump isn't racist. I was like, he just, to want a wall in Mexico isn't racist. It's actually, it actually is not racist because it's going to help the black people and it's going to help everybody, So, but then I started thinking about, I was like, actually, because then I was listening to Facebook, and then Snoop Dogg says something about how, anybody who's on Donald Trump's side is a white supremacist or racist. But in my mind, I was like, well, Snoop Dogg, you're a black guy who talks about drugs and killing people, and like, and you even have that song "F them N-words," and I'm like, dude, Snoop Dogg, you're the racist one. You're a Satanist. You're the one who's actually worse for black people than Donald Trump. And that's the way that I was thinking in my mind. I was like, the right wingers are actually the non-racist ones. I was like a typical right winger, like, no, right wingers are the non-racist ones. You guys are the ones who are worse for black people. You leftists. But then I started thinking about it. I'm like, you know what? I did kind of become a right wing. I did become racist. I actually am kind of a white supremacist. So I'm like, huh. And I'm like, and I started thinking, I'm like, maybe I am a white supremacist. And then I'm thinking like, well, maybe if I go against Trump, it will help me get basketball videos and also get back on my grandpa's side because my grandpa was against Trump. And then also I was just confused, and I was just like, and I started feeling bad. Like, I was like, dude, I have been racist. And then there's the other stuff that happened was then the people on QAnon and stuff, they started posting all this stuff like anti-Jewish stuff, like, oh, the Holocaust was a hoax. And like, there was this white girl and she posted like the Holocaust didn't really happen, and, and saying all this negative stuff about Jews. And I always saw myself as Jewish. And remember, when I was a leftist communist, I wanted to mix the white people. I didn't like white people. I saw them as the biggest threat. And I saw how the QAnon people, a lot of them, including my uncle, were very much against Jews. And my uncle was making a lot of posts on Facebook against Jews. And he was QAnon, and he liked Donald Trump. So then I started thinking, like, you know what? Maybe when I was on Donald Trump's side, it is against the Jews. It is bad. It's not going to help the Jews. And and I was like, maybe I did become like, I am a white supremacist now, and maybe, it is the wrong way to go. And especially with, the QAnon are very, very much against Jews, denying the Holocaust and all that stuff. And I started to get confused, and I was like, shit, maybe I should. And I started not liking white people again. And then I switched, and I became a left-winger communist again. So then I started utilizing my grandpa's teachings, but utilizing them in the left-wing way. And I was thinking about how my grandpa was like, a right-winger in terms of like not giving welfare. But I had listened to an audiobook, and I forget what the book's name is, but it's a popular audiobook, but it was written by two brown people. And it was very leftist, and it was talking about like, my grandpa would be like, if you give to people, then they'll misuse it. People need to get jobs, and then, serve apprenticeship to money, and then they'll raise their consciousness, and then they can utilize money. But if you just give handouts to people, they'll misuse it. They'll buy drugs, they'll buy hookers, and it's just not helpful. What's helpful is people getting jobs and being a part of the hero's journey, and then growing and stuff like that. So I always saw him as a right-wing white supremacist. But then in this book, they were talking about like, no, there have been studies, but again, agendas. Like, we don't know, but the book was written by two brown people from India, I think. But they were like, no, giving to the poor is not, they don't utilize it for drugs and prostitutes and stuff. They utilize it for good things, for beneficial things, and for clothes and stuff. And they've done studies on this. And so I was just like, my grandpa he has it wrong. And then I started listening to old lectures that I made in 2013, the first lectures I made about the quadrant model in 2012, 2013. And I had taken them down because I had become, because when I made those lectures, I was a left-wing communist. And I was very anti my grandpa and anti-religion. But then when I started making these, but then when I became a right winger in like 2014, I took them down because I was like, I changed my mind, and I became pro-religion, and I became pro-white. Before I was anti-white, anti-religion, and I thought religion was white supremacist when I was a communist. But then when I became pro-religion, I was pro-white. So I started listening to those lectures, and then I started seeing how in those lectures I was talking about how basically I didn't say it outright, but I was just basically talking about how my grandpa was a victim blamer, how I thought that religious people tended to be victim blamers, and they justify the status quo by saying like, oh, God wanted it. And I was talking about how like there was this black women who I went to their church, and they were like, oh yeah, the reason why God allowed slavery and stuff was because we were worshiping idols in Africa and stuff like that. And I hated that idea because I was like, you guys are blaming yourselves. You guys are victim blamers. And I wanted to destroy religion because I wanted the white people to be mixed and destroy the white people and defeat the white people because I saw myself as Jewish. So I was like, so I didn't like religion. I thought that religion maintained the status quo. It maintained, and like in this case, like the women like, oh, well, you know, we were worshiping idols, so slavery was justified, and, you know, God is just. And I was like, and I wanted to see religion as just an epiphenomena of Darwinism. So I was like, no, you know, the white people put that religion on you, and yes, there's probably a conservative bent in all tribal societies where people want to justify the status quo because that helps to maintain the tribe. But in this case, it's not helpful for the black people to want to justify the status quo because, you know, you guys are the minority and you guys are being, you know, mistreated, and you tell yourselves, oh, well, you know, the slavery must have been justified. And I'm like, no, don't think that way. Like, that's not good to think that way. And I'm like, you know, so I hated religion, and I also hated how like when white people would read about the Jews and stuff, they'd be like, yeah, the Jews, they were sinful and they brought it on themselves and they killed Jesus, and, you know, and I was like, no, because I saw myself as Jewish, and I was like, no, really what happened was, you know, there were stronger empires and they conquered the Jews, and then the Jews they made up stories, and they wanted to say, oh, it was because we were sinful. But no, it would have happened regardless if they were sinful or not. And like, and religion is just a way to justify the status quo, and it's a conservative thing then, and it's something that it's just an epiphenomenon of Darwinism. And the reason why people tend to be conservative and want to believe that type of stuff is because probably believing in God and believing in religion had survival benefits for people's genes, you know, and it maintained societies like the Jewish people, you know, they had the food laws because it helped to keep their society together, keep their tribe together. And even I was like, even the laws about like giving to the poor, I was like, it just had beneficial effects for the people's genes, because if you give to the poor, then there's going to be less, you know, Marxist revolutions, and that's in Marxist revolutions is chaos, and that's bad for genes. So even stuff like give to the poor and don't commit adultery and don't kill, that having those laws had survival benefits for people's genes because it created less chaos, and thus those tribes survived. And I was like, so, you know, and they say that these things came from God, but no, it's just they were good for their genes. So I wanted to believe this because I saw religion, especially Christianity, as bad because I thought that it maintained the status quo, it maintained white supremacy, it maintained division. And like, for instance, I thought that Christians just believed Christianity so that they could stay separate from Muslims. And I thought that it was really just white people who tend to be Christians wanting to separate from Muslims who tend to be brown. And I thought that it was just, and so that maintained the status quo. But I wanted the white people to mix. So I wanted to just abolish Christianity and abolish religion. So I tried to argue that Jesus was a Marxist, and you know, and religion is just, you know, Nietzsche's idea is just a way for it was just a way for the priestly class or the people who didn't have power to feel powerful by saying, oh, well, we're superior. We don't have harems of women, but we're actually superior because we're going to have an afterlife, whereas the nobles who have a lot of sex and a lot of money, they're gonna not have an afterlife. And I wanted to destroy religion. And I want to be like, yeah, Christianity, all that stuff is just basically Nietzsche. It's just basically power dynamics and genetic Darwinism at its core. And I said that's the reason why, you know, Catholics who were like Italians separated from Germans who were Protestants, because they were separate ethnic groups, and it was really just Darwinism, but they claimed it was religion. It was just really Darwinism. So that's the way I saw it. But really, I just wanted to destroy, especially Christianity, and just say it's just all Darwinism. But in my mind, I wanted a society, and what I envisioned was like a society of forecasts where people were separated based around personality type, but you mix all the races together and just separate people based off caste and personality type, and then you'll get everybody mixed, and then that would destroy the white people. That's really what I wanted, and I'm going to get more into that in the next lecture. But I started listening to those old lectures I made where I was like a leftist communist and I was against religion, and I was basically saying like, yeah, it's all, victim blaming, and I was going against my grandpa who I thought was a victim blamer. And my grandpa also had that idea like there's no such thing as racism, but in my mind I was like, yes, there is such thing as racism, and racism a lot has to do with genetic Darwinism. And the reason why people tend to be racist against black people, I was arguing, was because black people tend to have a lot of genetic diversity because they come from Africa, and only one family left Africa and they became all the other people. And so I argued that all the other people are inbred, and that's why all the other people tend to be racist against Africans, because they all share genes with each other and Africans don't. And I said that's even why Africans are racist against themselves. And I just thought it was all genetic Darwinism. I thought that religion was just an epiphenomena of genetic Darwinism. And I wanted to destroy religion, especially Christianity, because I wanted really to defeat white people and to make white people mix. So I was just like, religion's fake, and and all that. That was kind of what I wanted. And but my grandpa was like, well, there's no such thing as racism. But I'm like, yes, there is such thing as racism. And like one example I gave was there was these white people, and they said like that the Native Americans had noble features. And I was like, yeah, because Native Americans and white people both emerged from that one group that left Africa, so they're more genetically similar. So they liked each other more, and that's why they also both didn't like the black people, kind of. But at the same, so in my mind, when I was a leftist communist, I didn't like white people. I liked Asians the second most, but I didn't like them as much. I liked black people the most, and brown people I liked the third most. But really, I just wanted to mix white people because I saw them as the biggest threat to Jews. So, but I'm listening to those lectures, and I'm starting to see like, okay, but in those lectures, I'm talking about victim blaming and how I thought my grandpa was a victim blamer and stuff like that, and how he believed that there's no such thing as racism, but I thought he was really racist, and I thought that his whole ideology, his like take responsibility, and that whole ideology was white supremacist. So I'm listening to those lectures, and then I start to go back toward that, and I'm like, yeah, I was right. My grandpa is a white supremacist, and his whole stuff is kind of like, it's not helpful. It's kind of, his teachings are stupid. So I went back to becoming a leftist communist, and I became anti-white again, and I wanted to mix the white people again. So I'll get more into that in the next lecture.